Pentatonic scales, major scale modes, triads, and arpeggios are often taught as completely separate topics, and that's a huge mistake. It's much more efficient and much more musically useful to understand how these concepts relate to each other. The caged system, when taught through the right lens, does exactly that. When an improviser looks at the fretboard, they are simultaneously aware of the locations of roots, nearby chord tones, and scale fragments that can be used to create phrases. It's like a pegboard where the roots are pegs and you could snap different musical concepts into place around them. We could snap in a pentatonic scale, swap it out for a major scale mode, or an arpeggio. Better yet, these concepts layer on top of each other, and that layering lets you make really smart note choices. The roots are the most important notes, followed by the chord tones, the pentatonic scale, and lastly, the full diatonic mode. Where fret science truly differs from other methods is to encourage you to not even bother memorizing dozens of different scale diagrams. Instead, you can learn to recreate them on the fly using much simpler and smaller patterns. This approach has all the goodness of the caged system, but with way less memorization. Here we can recreate a minor pentatonic scale by linking up the rectangle and stack shapes with the roots. Or we can swap it out for the major pentatonic scale. We just have to be aware of the warp whenever one of these shapes overlaps the G and B strings. This method is not only simpler, it's easier to make it sound musical, and it's also more effective at training your brain, but that's a topic for a different video. The biggest limitation of the caged system is that the layers of arpeggios and scales are too often taught as separate concepts. It turns out this stuff is easier to learn when they're taught together, and understanding the connections between triads, pentatonics, and modes is a massive enabler for making your playing sound more musical. This lesson will demystify the caged system and show you how the layers work together to support improvisation. And on our way there, we'll do a deep dive on triads, which are the DNA of harmony. You'll learn how to do this all over the fretboard, no matter where your fingers are, and you'll see how to use these models to improvise. The caged system is based on the observation that there are 5 major chords that can be played in open position: C, A, G, E, and D. And each of these chord shapes can be turned into a bar chord and moved around the fretboard to play every possible major chord. But before we get further into the caged system itself, we really need to talk about triads. The notes in a triad are built from 2 stacked third intervals. A major third is a 4-fret distance, and a minor third is a 3-fret distance. When stacked like they are here, the first note in the sequence is called the root, the middle one is the third, and the last one is the 5th. And there are 4 possible ways you can combine these 2 types of intervals together to make triads. As shown here, a major third plus a minor third makes a major triad. If we swap them around, a minor third plus a major third makes a minor triad. 2 minor thirds stacked together makes a diminished triad, and 2 major thirds stacked together makes an augmented triad. Another important way to understand this is to see the triads inside a major scale mode, where a third is just 2 notes separated by one other note. Here we have the major scale, or Ionian mode, over 1.5 octaves. Inside the major scale modes, there are major, minor, and diminished triads. If we build on the first scale degree, we get a major triad. The second scale degree gives us a minor triad. The third scale degree gives us minor as well. The fourth gives us major. The 5th also gives us major. The 6th gives us a minor triad. And finally, the triad built on the 7th scale degree is diminished. When playing a triad, it turns out that it doesn't matter much what order you position the notes on the fretboard, as long as you play all 3 of them together. Different voicings do sound a little different, but any 2 voicings of the same triad will sound much more like each other than 2 different triads would. In a C major triad, the notes are C, E, and G, and here all of those notes are marked on the fretboard. I'll relabel them as root, third, and 5th. There are literally dozens of different ways to play a C major triad across the fretboard. Here are just a few of the common ones. We have the open or cowboy chord voicing, the A bar chord shape, the E bar chord shape. There are 3 closed form voicings on strings 2 to 4. 3 on strings 1 to 3. We'll come back to this in a minute. Here's an A major triad on strings 4 to 6. If the root is on the bottom like it is here, we call it root position. If you leapfrog the root up to the top of the chord, you get first inversion. If you then leapfrog the third up to the top, you get second inversion. And we can continue this until we run out of strings, cycling through the inversions. If we had started in first inversion, we could do the same thing. Shift the third up to get second inversion, shift up the fifth and we're back to root position, and so on. If you know your one note per string arpeggios, you can see that we're outlining them here. Now, it wouldn't be a fret science video if we didn't show you how shapes change as you move them across the warp between the G and B strings. Here, a root position A major triad becomes a D major triad when we shift up to the next set of strings. When we shift again, the fifth goes across the warp and moves up a fret, changing the shape and making a G major triad. One last shift, and this time the third crosses the warp, and we land on a C major triad. Recall from our previous video that when we shift a chord shape up a string set like this, we move along the cycle of fourths, which is why we went from A to D to G to C. We can do the same thing starting from an A major triad in first inversion on the lowest strings. With our first shift, we keep the same shape but get a D major triad. Shifting again changes our shape slightly as the root crosses the warp. Again, we have G major. And our last shift gives us the first inversion C major triad. One more time for the fans in the back. We start with a second inversion A major triad, shift up to D major, keeping the shape, shift again to G major, warping the location of the third, and finally shifting to C major, this time warping the location of the root. There are 3 basic major triad shapes, one for each inversion, and they're modified by the warp as we just discussed. This gives us 9 shapes in total. The shapes in the bottom row here would be repeated if we shifted down to the lowest string set. One thing to notice in every one of these shapes is that the third is always 1 string above the root or 2 strings below it. The fifth is always 1 string below the root or 2 strings above it. Also notice that as you move toward the bridge, you shift to the next inversion, and vice versa. Now, starting from these major triad shapes, we can create the other types of triads by adjusting the positions of the thirds and fifths. From major to get to minor, we shift the thirds down 1 fret. From minor to get to diminished, we shift the fifths down 1 fret. If we go back the other direction, shifting the fifths up a fret moves us from diminished to minor. Shifting the thirds up a fret from there moves us from minor to major. And finally, shifting the fifths up a fret moves us from major to augmented. One kind of cool thing about the augmented triads is that all of the inversions on each string set have the exact same shape. Not a terribly useful factoid, but cool nonetheless. At its core, each caged position is really about the location of roots relative to your fingers. In the C position, the root is under your index finger on the B string or under your ring finger on the A string. In the A position, it's under your ring finger on the G string or under your index finger on the A string. You can see how this goes. The string that contains the root and which finger is on it uniquely determines which of the 5 patterns you're playing. It's not really all that useful to associate these patterns with the names of the open chords they came from, but that's how a lot of guitarists talk about them. In my opinion, it's much more valuable to think about them in terms of where the roots are relative to your fingers. If we fill in the major, third, and fifth around these locations, we get the familiar caged bar chords. These shapes can be easily modified to create minor chords and seventh chords. Let's focus on the A and E positions where we do this most easily. We can move the third down a half step to make them minor chords. From the minor chord, you can lower one of the roots by 2 semitones to make a minor 7 chord. Going back to the major triad, if you lower one of the roots by half a step, you get a major 7 chord. If you were to lower it 2 semitones, you'd get a dominant 7 chord. Now that we know how to map triads across the entire fretboard, let's layer pentatonic scales and the modes on top. If you haven't already seen my video on the rectangle and the stack, I highly recommend you check it out after you finish watching this one. In a nutshell, every pentatonic scale shape is made up of alternating shapes I call rectangles and stacks. They get distorted sometimes by the warp between the G and B strings, but they are just simple geometric shapes that snap together like Legos. The position of the root inside each shape depends on whether you're playing the major or minor pentatonic scale. Notice that the minor triad is fully contained in the minor pentatonic scale. Here are the roots, the flat thirds, and the fifths. And the major triad is fully contained in the major pentatonic scale, roots, thirds, and fifths. Here I've color-coded the 5 minor pentatonic shapes. If we take away the 4th and the flat 7th, we're left with the minor triad. And if we hide the rectangle and stack outlines, you can see we're left with the 5 minor triad arpeggio shapes. Similarly, if we start with the 5 major pentatonic shapes, we can take away the 2nds and 6ths, and if we also remove the rectangle and stack outlines, the major arpeggio shapes are right there. So how do we use this in practice? Let's say we wanted to play G minor pentatonic and our index finger was here at the 8th fret. This corresponds to the C shape, and we can place a rectangle under our index finger. Placing stacks on either side fills out form 3 of the minor pentatonic scale. Similarly, if we wanted to play G major pentatonic, we'd place a stack under our index finger, and we can place rectangles on either side to complete form 4. Now let's say we wanted to play the G Dorian mode here. We recognize that this is still the C shape, and we'll reference the handy 5-string modal pattern from a previous video, which I've linked above. This simple underlying pattern repeats across the fretboard to make every possible mode. To use it, we'll focus on the notes marked 2, since the Dorian mode is built on the 2nd scale degree of the major scale. We drop in the fingering pattern that corresponds to where our index finger is, and to play up the scale, we drop in the next fingering pattern. To play down the scale, we have to take the warp into account, and then we simply copy over the patterns for each string in order, wrapping around as necessary. And now, if we relabel the notes with their harmonic function in the Dorian scale, we can see that form 3 of the minor pentatonic scale is right there, and inside that is a G minor arpeggio. To use the CAGED system for improvising, you'll usually go in the other direction. No matter where your fingers are, you'll simply find the root, find the triad, know how the pentatonic scale falls around that triad, and potentially know how the modes fall there too. This takes some practice, but the system itself is really that simple. And the huge benefit is that it gives you a hierarchy of notes to work with. The notes in the underlying triad are the most consonant, and they make great landing points for ending your phrases. You can add in the other notes of the pentatonic scale to build out your lines. You'll need to experiment to get a feel for which note colors you like in different contexts, and which ones give the right amount of tension and release in the moment. The CAGED system puts the tools to make that exploration possible right under your fingers. As another example, let's look at an E major context. Here we have our index finger on the 5th fret of the B string, which is an E note, and we can find an E major triad there. The rectangles and stack of the E major pentatonic scale sit on top of that, and the E mixolydian mode sits right on top of that. I'd like to do one more example. In my first video, I showed that if you can find the rectangle inside a pentatonic shape, you can easily turn it into a mode by filling in the 2 missing notes. There are 3 ways to fill in those notes, giving you 3 minor and 3 major modes. The only missing mode in this system is Locrian, and that mode is hardly ever used anyway. If the 2 notes are shifted to the right, you get either the Dorian or the Lydian mode depending on which pentatonic scale you're playing. If the 2 notes are staggered, you get the Aeolian mode or natural minor scale inside the minor pentatonic, and the Ionian or major scale inside the major pentatonic. And if the 2 notes are shifted to the left, you get the Phrygian inside the minor pentatonic and the Mixolydian inside the major. So let's see this in practice. We're playing E major pentatonic again, but this time our index finger is on the 9th fret E on the G string. There's a convenient E major triad right there, and we build a major pentatonic scale by placing a stack surrounded by 2 rectangles. To make this the Mixolydian mode, we fill in the 2 missing notes shifted over to the left inside the rectangle. And to complete the shape, we can use the same approach we did before with the 5-string repeating modal pattern by starting with the rectangle and building outward. There was a lot of information jammed into this video, and if you'd like a downloadable PDF cheat sheet with all of the concepts you just saw, check out the link in the video description. And if this video helped you on your journey, please leave a comment, hit the like button, and make sure you're subscribed to this channel. And sign up for the Fret Science mailing list at fretscience.com.